Our top focus this hour, the United States has warned of further sanctions against China. The US says that China's actions in Hong Kong flagrantly violated the city's autonomy. This after all pro-democracy leaders resigned in Hong Kong after 4 of their colleagues were dismissed from the assembly. The US National Security Advisor Robert O'Brien said, and I quote, Beijing's recent actions disqualifying pro-democracy legislators from Hong Kong's Legislative Council leave no doubt that the Chinese Communist Party has flagrantly violated its international commitments. He added that the United States would continue to identify and sanction those responsible for extinguishing Hong Kong's freedom. Earlier on Monday, the United States had imposed sanctions on former officials who were accused of curbing freedoms in Hong Kong. The warning from America came in response to the ousting of 4 of Hong Kong's pro-democracy lawmakers by pro-Beijing authorities. Hong Kong's other pro-democracy lawmakers reacted by saying that they would all quit in protest, reducing the semi-autonomous city's once feisty legislature to a gathering of Chinese loyalists. Meanwhile, in Europe, Germany, that is the holder of the European Union's rotating presidency, has criticized China for the dismissal of several pro-democracy opposition lawmakers. The German Foreign Ministry spokesperson said that the developments in Hong Kong were the latest step in a deeply worrying trend, which was aimed at undermining pluralism and the freedom of expression. All Hong Kong pro-democracy lawmakers have threatened to resign in protest against the disqualification of 4 opposition members. Hong Kong disqualified the 4 opposition members of its legislature for endangering security. The pro-democracy leaders see this as a move by Beijing to tighten its grip further on Hong Kong.
But in order to fight against the central government, the authoritative government, we stand for the people of Hong Kong. We fight for democracy in the long run. And today, we will resign from our positions because our partners, our colleagues are being disqualified by the central government's ruthless move. And they found no reason at all to disqualify our colleagues.
The expulsions came shortly after China's parliament adopted a resolution. China has allowed Hong Kong's executive to expel legislators who are deemed to be supporting Hong Kong's independence, colluding with foreign forces, or even threatening national security without having to go through the courts, while Hong Kong's Legislative Council is controlled by a pro-Beijing camp. British Foreign Secretary Dominic Raab has now criticized China's decision to oust the 4 pro-democracy lawmakers, calling it a further assault on Hong Kong's autonomy and freedoms. He said that the campaign to harass, stifle and disqualify democratic opposition tarnishes China's international reputation. He also said that this undermines Hong Kong's long-term stability. Pro-democracy leaders in Hong Kong have tried to make a stand against what many people in the former British colony see as Beijing's whittling away of freedoms and institutional checks and balances. Despite a promise of a high degree of autonomy, China denies curbing rights and freedoms in the global financial hub. But authorities in Hong Kong and Beijing have now moved swiftly to stifle dissent after anti-government protests flared up in June last year and plunged the city into crisis. The Hong Kong government said that 4 legislators, Kwok Ka-ki, Alvin Yeung, Kenneth Leung and Dennis Kwok, were expelled from the assembly for endangering national security. However, it did not elaborate on the charges. The disqualifications are likely to add to the concerns in the West about Hong Kong's autonomy, promised under a one country, two systems formula when Britain had handed Hong Kong to China in the year 1997. Our correspondent Richard Kimber is now joining us live with the latest from Hong Kong. Thanks so much for joining us, Richard. Now, all Hong Kong pro-democracy lawmakers have threatened to resign in a huge protest against the disqualification of 4 opposition members. Now, this disqualification is being viewed as a move by Beijing to tighten its grip even further on Hong Kong. So tell us more about the situation in Hong Kong as of now.
Well, just in the last couple of hours, the pro-democrat lawmakers have staged what ultimately may be their last ever protest inside the city's legislative chamber. A couple of them unfurled banners in the legislative chamber, and I'll just read you the note that was on those banners. It said, "Carrie Lam, the chief executive here, Carrie Lam has brought calamity to Hong Kong and its people. her infamy will last 10,000 years. That was the strongly worded message written in Chinese characters across two large banners that were unfurled by pro-democracy lawmakers today. This, as I say, may be the last protest they ever stage, at least for this legislative session in the chamber, since just in the next couple of hours we're expecting the formal resignation of all of the remaining lawmakers.
Right.
That's actually 15 remaining lawmakers, in addition to the 4 who were disqualified yesterday.
Right. Now, Richard, other countries too have voiced their opposition against China's tightening grip on Hong Kong, including Britain and Germany. In fact, the US has warned of further sanctions against China. So will this global stand against China help in improving the fate of the people of Hong Kong?
Well, that's right. There's been a fairly quick outpouring of support for the pro-democracy camp from overseas. The US, of course, sanctioned 4 Chinese and Hong Kong officials just on Monday this week before any of this happened. So it's basically saying that it may up the ante even further after this disqualification took place. Whether that pressure really results in anything is honestly highly unlikely, because Beijing has shown a reluctance so far to concede to any forms of international pressure, whether it's been US sanctions or UK criticism in any way, shape or form. And increasingly, the Hong Kong government is just towing the Beijing line. So it seems unlikely that whatever the criticism from overseas or the support from overseas towards these pro-democracy lawmakers, anything will really change here.
Right. Richard, my final question. What lies ahead for the pro-democracy movement in Hong Kong?
Well, those lawmakers that are due to resign, they've said that although they'll be leaving the legislative chamber, they will not be giving up their fight. And they've been trying to reassure the public and their supporters that even though they won't have a presence in the chamber anymore to actually debate political affairs, they will continue at a grassroots level to try and help people campaign, to help spread the message overseas that there is still a very strong voice of opposition here. But the reality is very simple, that there will now be very little obstruction inside the legislature to any government piece of legislation. And although the President of the Legislative Council here has said that even without a pro-democracy camp there will still be, he says, opposition to government ideas, because even within the pro-democracy camp, even within the pro-government camp, he says there are still opponents and opposition voices. It's quite obvious that there will be very little to stop any kind of budgetary plan or new development plan from actually passing through relatively quickly. So really in the short term what will happen is there may be a raft of government bills that are able to process quite quickly without really any political opposition, even if there's street level protests.
Right. All right, Richard, thank you so much for all your inputs on the story, and thank you for joining us on this broadcast.